So as with the Sedna video, I'm just going to walk you through some of the main points of Demeter and Persephone in terms of background. This is a little longer, and it's not really keyed to the images. I just found a few images of Demeter by herself or with other people, and as we go through, I'll point out some of them to you. So Demeter, like Sedna, has links to fertility. Demeter is the goddess of fertility, and of course we're looking at Greek mythology. I shouldn't assume that everybody knows who Demeter or Persephone is. In Greek mythology, Demeter is the goddess of fertility, but she had no spouse, so we don't see a husband in the picture. There are two characters in this story, two main characters, and then a third character who creates the triad of stages of a woman's life, and this is explained pretty well in the head note to Demeter and Persephone in the textbook, so I won't review that again here, but we have Demeter is the mother, of course, Persephone is the daughter, and Hecate would be the old woman who told Demeter what she had heard in the abduction of Persephone. So the figure of Persephone herself, the daughter, is known as Kore, K-O-R-E, and that's a term that signifies a young woman. And Persephone is identified with grain buried in the ground. So Demeter is all about grain being an important harvest for the ancient Greeks. I have one image here. It's not quite what I was looking for, but you can kind of see from this image, this is Eleusis, I believe, in the background how mountainous it is, and much of Greece is like this. Greece is very mountainous with narrow valleys where agriculture is difficult, so there's not a widespread agriculture system in place, and it's also difficult to get from one region to the other. You can tell with these mountains. So the stories about these different gods and goddesses would have varied from place to place. But this is kind of what it looks like, and so Persephone is this grain itself. Greece has a different climate from our own. The months allotted to summer and fall and winter are kind of different than ours. We can't just go by our four seasons. Theirs is a little different. So because they have such a different climate, the months allotted to her enforced underground habitation may be confusing to us. In fact, various theories argue what is meant by the number of months in the myths. Like some scholars argue that the 4 months equals the number of sterile hot summer months where the seed itself would be stored in a granary waiting to be planted in the cooler, damper weather. Right. So there's different theories about how many months was Persephone underground, what did those months signify. So not standard. You can read a lot of different versions and see a lot of different things. So there's so many versions of the myth that just adds to the confusion. Persephone, and here's Demeter, often seen with grain. Let's see, there's another one here. Here's more grain. This young fella's Triptolemus. He is the one who Demeter teaches what to do with this grain, how to best produce crops. And he goes out and spreads that information around. So that makes Demeter kind of a culture hero. I'll get to that again in a moment. So Persephone herself, the daughter, is known as Parthenos. Parthenoi refers to young girls of 14 who are married, and in ancient times they were often married to older warriors. These men could be 15, 20 years older than them. So they were sort of snatched away from childhood to become wives and mothers themselves. The eating of the pomegranate seed then, and that's what makes Persephone, so it sort of crosses, that's where she crosses the divide. Once she eats the pomegranate seeds, she's no longer an innocent child. She's basically becomes Hades' wife. Um, so it's sort of a metaphor for having sexual relations. Once this happens, the girl is no longer a child and cannot go back to childish ways. And that's what happens with Persephone. She becomes a, wife herself. She kind of grows into that role from a young Kore to a mother like Demeter. Um, so girls could be given to any man of their father's choosing, usually a close family member, a cousin or an uncle or something, so that any family property would remain intact. Um, and then she would go to live with that husband's family. And that's basically what happens to Persephone, right? Zeus gives her to Hades, regardless of what her mother would have wanted for her or what Persephone would have wanted for herself. And let's go back to the site of Eleusis. And this is detailed in the second reading that I provided for you, not in the Rosenberg text, but the additional reading. So these are called the Eleusinian Mysteries, and this is one of the most famous religion cults of the ancient world, these mysteries. Around the time of the 6th century BCE, what is known as the Homeric hymn to Demeter. It's a poem that explains the origin of this cult. So it comes out around that time. So we kind of assume that the cult itself arose somewhere in that time period based on the information in that poem. Very little is known about the mysteries, because basically those with big mouths were punished by death. So if you spoke, you could lose your life. It seems to have grown out of agricultural festivals. Most of what we know comes from, I have any wall engraving here. Yeah, engravings on walls of different parts, walls of temples of different parts of the rituals. But of course, we don't have a really clear idea of what's going on. We just know it has something to do with the agricultural festivals that were held in fall, and they involved the cults, which would allow both male and female initiates, they were called, free and slave. The only people excluded were murderers. So they were pretty open to anybody. They preached a sort of salvation in the afterlife, and it gave Christianity quite a run for its money early on, because of its kind of openness, and it also influenced Christianity in some ways, again with the idea of an afterlife and salvation and that sort of thing. And we've already seen the information here about Triptolemus. Some versions of the myth, she gives him information on how to grow plants. Let's see if there's any other image. This is a really early image, and it looks like it's both Demeter and Persephone there. Who these two little folks are, I have no idea. I didn't research that. And again, I think this may be when Demeter is at Eleusis, and she's kind of at the fountain. She's sort of depressed, and the girls come along and try and cheer her up. I think that might be that. Yeah, and that's Triptolemus. She's teaching them how to sow the corn. So that is some background information. I hope it makes the myth itself make a little more sense.